Bringing you the news of old on This Week in History with Paul Waite.
I picked this fact especially for Callum, actually. So in the year 911, the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte between Charles the Simple and Rollo of Normandy. So tell us all about Rollo, Callum.
Rollo was a Viking.
Yes,
He
and...
founded Normandy.
We didn't found Normandy, did we?
Yes.
No, we didn't.
He was paid off by the Frankish king.
But Normandy already existed.
He was paid off by the Frankish king to look after the northern shores of Francia to stop Viking invaders. So yeah, he just became the lord there, became Duke Rollo.
And who was his brother?
Well, I don't think in reality his brother was Ragnar.
You don't think so?
No, that was made up for the show.
I'm not sure about that. I think it might have been.
Well, we'll find out. We'll find out and let you know.
So I think it's quite important, this significantly. So Rollo is singularly responsible for the northern French becoming Norsemen, in effectively. Normandy.
That's what I'm pretty sure it is, because Normandy
I suppose you did, yeah,
Northman's land. That's what it means.
Yes. So I think you're. I owe an apology in that respect. I think.
No apology.
Probably the way that you put it. I think it's probably sort of right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some reading about this, and on this week in history next week we're actually going to talk about. Funny enough, last week I actually talked to a guy who came from Normandy. Most fascinating bloke, Callum. He's lived in Belfast for 20 years. You've never heard such a funny accent in all your life. So you start off and go, "I love Paul, it's very good to do today." So it is. And after I started laughing, and he, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, "Where'd you come from?" He said, "Normandy." You know, and then I said, "You start off all your sentences in French, and then right at the last minute of the sentence, you suddenly sound like an Irishman." And he says,
I remember I met a Spanish person that lived in Canada for 15 years once, and they had a really weird accent like that. You know, because it was all like a boot, but mixed in with Spanish. It was really strange. I was like, what the hell?
So next we go 129 years down the road to a very famous legend, a woman called Lady Godiva, who of course was allegedly rode naked on horseback through Coventry. And why do you think she did this?
Because
I found it hard to believe.
Because her husband, something to do with her husband and taxes.
Yeah, how do you know that?
So his name was Thomas something, I think.
Was he?
Yeah. And she said something to the effect that if I ride naked through public or something like that, would you let the people not pay their taxes or something like that? And he said yes, thinking that she would never do it, so she did it.
Wow.
And the people didn't have to pay it. Something.
So her husband was the
like
Earl
that.
of Mercia. And of course, there's no way of knowing whether it was true or not. I suspect it probably isn't true anyway. I find it very hard to believe that a noble woman would do that, to be honest with you.
Not a big deal, is it?
Sorry?
Not a big deal. Getting naked.
I think it is, to be honest. 1189, Richard the Lionheart was crowned King of England. Richard the Lionheart, Coeur de Lion. So he's probably one of those kings who I would say sort of gone down in history as a great king. Would you agree with that, from your perception?
Yeah, well, I think there's mixed feelings of it. Obviously, he hardly spent any time in England, did he? So I
But
think
that's because you know that. I'm talking about the common perception, not your perception.
A very famous king, I would say.
yeah, definitely, definitely a very famous king.
That's a good way of putting it, I think.
Renowned for his battles.
So I think the general
Crusades.
view would be Richard the Lionheart was a bit of a swashbuckling great king, and I think the reality is you could actually argue on a scientific basis that John was actually a better king. He could. So anyway, 1295, interesting one. Scotland and France formed an alliance, the beginning of what is now called the Old Alliance, which is AULD. So this would be a very good example of people getting together, like your enemy. We have common enemies, being England, obviously.
The enemy, what was it?
Your enemy is my enemy, whatever.
The friend of my enemy is my friend. No, the enemy of my... What was it? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, or something like that. That's a saying, isn't there? I just can't remember exactly what it is.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so Scotland and France, interesting bedfellows, really, but the alliance lasted for a very long time, and I think there's still sort of a special, if you call it, like a special relationship between Scotland and France. 1533, Pope Clement VII excommunicated Henry VIII. And you know this true story, Callum? Very pleased about this. So you wouldn't believe it. So I researched this, obviously. Watched University Challenge. the next show after I'd done this, and that was one of the questions.
All right.
So I said, Pope Clement VII. Ah. So it just goes to show, you see, learning begats learning and all that. The final point on this part of On This Week in History, something that, again, certain things in history really upset me, and this is one of them. So in 1553, Lady Jane Grey, the daughter of the Duke of Suffolk, was proclaimed the King of England. So she was queen for 9 days, is the thing. Obviously, she was put on the throne as a puppet queen to represent the Protestant claim. So the king, Edward VI, had basically in his lifetime, I think he was 14 when he died. He basically made Elizabeth. He declared that Elizabeth and Mary were both illegitimate. I think that's true to say. So from a certain point of view, obviously neither of them had a right to the throne. So I think the Protestants were so keen after Edward died prematurely that they didn't want the Catholics in anything other than Mary. But obviously the will of the people, which I think would have been very different if they'd seen what she was really like. And poor old Jane was beheaded. So I feel very sorry for this very young girl that probably, I don't know, we never know quite what part she had in that. So that's the end of On This Week in History for the first part. And we're going on now with a great Ska song on my radio and selector.
On This Week in History.
Welcome back to the second part of On This Week in History. And it's Tuesday, July the 6th. And it's Paul, Callum and Drew. As always, bringing you historic delights. Next, again, I've just picked this chat really because of local significance to do with Bristol. So in 1576, Martin Frobisher sighted Greenland, and I also think Frobisher was in charge of certain part of the fleet in the Spanish Armada. Callum, I'm not entirely sure about that, but there's I think there's a big connection between Frobisher and Bristol. Can't remember exactly. So 1645, again, a point of great local interest. The Battle of Langport took place.
Ooh, Langport near us.
Yes, and that was a victory for Oliver Cromwell over the Royalists.
All right.
It's quite interesting that, no more than, 38 years later, there was another battle very close to Langport, being Sedgemoor. Where, of course, the poor old Duke of Monmouth met his grisly end. Well, he didn't actually there, but he did shortly afterwards. 1687, Isaac Newton's great work, Principia, is published. So, obviously, Isaac Newton, very famous.
Is this where he stated gravity? Or was it
Well, he did write about that, yes.
Nice.
So I think he's supposed to observe this from watching apples falling out of a tree. Isn't he?
Yeah. An apple
Is this
fell on
something
his
we
head.
can talk about in Pandora's box, Callum?
What? Gravity?
Yes. Or that
Maybe.
sort of thing.
I don't know. I don't think it'd be captivating
I'd like you to
enough.
talk about Dragon Man.
Dragon Man, yeah?
Yeah? You ever read about that?
Yeah, I've heard about that, yeah.
Was it Denisovian man or something?
Yeah, they found a new type of human ancestor.
That's so cool.
Yeah, no, I think there's some controversy of whether it's a Denisovian or not.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
But anyway, it's a very large skull.
A very large
But
skull
it's
indeed.
a significant enough find to we're probably going to have to rewrite our current understanding of human evolution, which is quite
that's
cool. Yeah.
So here we are. You just can't trust those Americans. In 1812, the USA invades Canada. What was called the Detroit Frontier.
Oh dear.
So I think this is the same year that we burnt the White House down.
Whoa.
Oh yeah. Well, is that because it was Canadians really that burned the White House down?
No, the Britons did.
Yeah, but they were like British Canadians, weren't they?
No, the British. The British burnt the White House down. I'd rather bet the sportsman's on it. I think you'll find I'm right. Of course, there was no difference anyway, was there?
No, exactly. That's part of my point. But I think they came from Canada.
Well, they might have come originally from Canada because they couldn't have come from anywhere else, could they? If you see my point. They couldn't come through America because America was another country, so they had to come from somewhere, didn't they?
Yeah.
So I think, yes. For those of you getting caught up in a thing there, I think watch the Murdoch Mysteries, for instance, which is a great program. On the Murdoch Mysteries, this is about 1890, maybe something like that. And of course, this is still Canada, where it's a dominion of Britain. So this is the Union Jack, etc., etc. And you know, I would say, Callum, it's no. To talk about it being Canadian or British would be like saying Birmingham was different to Bristol at the time. It's just a part of the UK.
Sure.
1816, Argentina declares independence from Spain. Greatly helped by Great Britain, it has to be said. So I think one of the things you could say about Great Britain's role in the world was mischief making. I think we've been the great mischief makers of history.
We've been all over the place.
Sounds a bit like you.
Not really. No.
Just go with Drew.
I'm quite a hobbit.
Like before our show today, he just quickly ran home.
Yeah, I did. I had to go
Which
and
is what, 600 yards?
Probably, yeah.
Maybe
Stone's
less.
throw.
Yep.
You had gypsies in your car park the other day.
Oh, yeah,
Did
that
you?
was... I didn't tell you about this. Absolutely crazy, because I live in a top floor flat
Yeah.
of a really old building, and I looked out the window, and there's a big car park down in front, like down at the bottom. We all park our cars. There was a horse in my space.
Was there?
There was literally,
just a horse
in my space. But
You're like, oh my god, my car's turned into a horse.
And covered everywhere. There's literally the biggest conglomeration of gypsies I've ever seen in my life.
I know that they're sort of allowed to do whatever they want, but surely they can't just park in somebody's car.
They were very naughty that day. They were blocking the road and everything.
So
Cars
what-
were trying to get past.
So what happened?
Just stayed there for a bit. Had
So
a pint in the pub.
Nobody moved them on then, or anything?
Nope.
Anyway,
Weird.
so moving on. So just what was interesting, but not that interesting. Sorry, Drew. In 1900, the Commonwealth of Australia was created.
Good old day that was, wasn't it?
So I'm not entirely sure of this. I think it probably went from being a dominion to the Commonwealth. I'm not quite sure what that meant. Probably some degree of self-governing, I would imagine. 1913, quite an interesting one. Romania declared war on Bulgaria. So obviously been tensions in the Balkans all through history, really. It's probably the most stable position ever in world history in the Balkans at the moment, I would say. And it's interesting, in my experience, having travelled to a few places around there, the thing that unifies most of them is they all hate the Turks, or the Ottoman Turks for sure. So it's interesting, this. Bulgaria were obviously on the side of the Germans in the First World War, so it's all very interesting history that we don't really get taught in the UK. And the final point and the second part of On This Week in History today is in 1921, Mongolia gained independence from China. So, country, as some of you know, I'm amazingly interested in for reasons I can't fully explain. Partly, I think, when I was a small boy, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandparents in the village that Callum lives in now, Stigursi. And there's a lovely man lived next door to my grandparents called Willie Webber. And he had a sister as well, Miss Webber. Neither of whom were married. And he had this wonderful collection of books which he used to let me have. And one of the books was called Children of the World, and it was written in maybe 1906 or something. So it's amazing perspective of an English writer in 1906. And there was one chapter on like Eskimo children, one on pygmies, and one of them was all about, I think it was called Children of the Steppes.
Oh yeah.
And it's never left me. So I find the book just left a real mark on me. So I've always been hugely interested in Mongolia, and obviously at one point they were the major force in the whole world on their funny little horses. So there we are. That's the end of the second part of On This Week in History, and next we have Find a Reason to Believe from Rod Stewart.
Bringing you the news of old on This Week in History with Paul Waite.
Got some quite interesting things to talk about today, Callum, in terms of time. So 1940, Marshal Pétain became the head of Vichy, which was the French collaboration government. And of course, it's very interesting. This is something that I find fascinating. So Marshal Pétain was a World War I hero, no doubt, hero, general in the First World War, distinguished, and then I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. Be interesting to listen to a debate between Pétain and Chamberlain, for instance. So they're sort of hewn from the same cloth in a way, weren't they? I don't know for certain, but I would imagine that Pétain probably had seen so many thousands of Frenchmen die in his lifetime. Maybe he thought enough was enough.
Yeah, maybe.
But I think I think where I would come at this is, in so doing, he lost his principles. And the fact is, the Vichy government did collaborate with the Nazis over the deportation of Jews, for instance. And it just wasn't a good place to be. And of course, a part of that is that effectively, although this isn't officially ever really recognised in history. The Vichy France was at war with Britain, effectively. And very soon after Pétain became the head of the Vichy government, diplomatic relations ended with the UK. So the UK, the French Free government actually was in London, Drew. So under Charles de Gaulle. 1945, quite an amazing moment in history, actually. So, maybe one of the greatest men ever, as recognised, maybe the greatest Prime Minister, who undoubtedly, I think, no matter what you say, no one can say that. I think if Churchill didn't exist, we would have lost the Second World War. I don't think.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't see how anyone could say otherwise, to be honest. His thanks for that, if you like. So actually, it's quite a good question. Is one of the questions: how many prime ministers were there in the Second World War? Do you know the answer to that?
How many in the Second World War? 1,
2,
2,
Three.
3.
Yeah, Neville Chamberlain, Winston Churchill, and Clement Attlee.
Oh, what? He was technically elected before the end of the Second World War, was he?
So obviously Chamberlain was prime minister for about a year to start off with. Then Churchill took over, and then I think it was about April or May 1945. Attlee. So in this general election, everyone obviously thought that Churchill would be a shoo-in, because he was such a great man. And actually, it was a landslide victory for Labour.
By that point, though, Berlin had already been taken over, hadn't it?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so the victory, the European war was over.
Yeah.
So the European war was over, but the Asian war, the Japanese war was still on, if you like. So 1962, fascinating one, this. Fred Baldassare was the first person to swim the English Channel underwater.
Very impressive.
Yeah, amazing. Just to think how you would go about that. Just pick this for selfish reasons for the Waite family. 1973, the Isle of Man starts to issue its own stamps.
The Isle of
Mexico.
Man
Yeah,
stamps.
Better than other stamps.
1994, the best ever film that's ever been made.
Titanic. I'm only joking.
Well, I'm glad you think it was a joke. So the only film I think compares with it would be Gladiator. I also would give, personally, I know not everyone agrees with this, I also think films like Lawrence of Arabia are great, and of course you've got the Star Wars films and The Lord of the Rings, but anyway, Forrest Gump was released in 1994.
The old favourite Forrest Gump.
I just love Forrest Gump's like one of those films like It's a Wonderful Life with James Stewart. One of those films that they always say if you're about to commit suicide, watch it. It's a Wonderful Life, and you've got a good chance of not wanting to die anymore. It's a film of a desperate man that finds hope and all that. And I think Forrest Gump is just a wonderful tale of how a kid is born with deformities and not very smart and all that. And actually, you'd have to say he becomes a great man. War hero, obviously. To some extent, his sort of absence of conventional intelligence becomes a great benefit to him because he just blindly accepts whatever the army tell him. He's a complete model soldier. I just think it's just a legend of a film. 2011, News of the World published its last edition after 168 years. This is basically over an expenses scandal. It's basically forced into a position where they had nowhere to go. I could actually remember going to the garage on the Sunday where that happened, funnily enough. 2011, again, South Sudan seceded from Sudan. Very poor part of the world, very hot and arid. This is a good one, right? So this is going to be a great one for Callum. This could be another Pandora's Box special, Callum. What do you think is the world's oldest biological colour?
What do you mean?
I'm just writing down what it is, so I'm not clever enough to explain to you any more than that.
Well, black, I guess.
Brown.
So it's actually bright pink.
Whoa.
So this is just
Biological colour.
So this is
life
bright
form
pink is the
colour.
world's oldest biological colour. It was determined in 2018 from marine shale rock that was dated at 1.1 billion years old.
Ah, okay.
All right. Okay.
So when colour started being introduced to life?
Yeah, thank you, Drew. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. So there we are. That's on This Week in History. So I think that's a That's definitely. I think one of the things we could do actually, Callum, is correlate on This Week in History with Pandora's Box a bit.
Maybe.
Yeah. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that this week. Check out if you want. Check it out again on demand on Aspen Waite Radio, or you can see it on YouTube and actually see us in the flesh. And next we have an iconic man, very cool, Lou Reed, Satellite 11.
Available now on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at AspenWaiteRadio.com.